I had to do a big arc so as to get the breeze right so I could get to the area I wanted to hunt in. As I was nearing the completion of the circuit, I noticed fresh sambar droppings that were still steaming on the ground, only metres in front of me. Visibility through the cover enabled me to see only about 40 metres ahead. I immediately crouched down and started scouring the country in front of me with my binoculars. After 5 minutes of looking and not seeing or finding anything, I very slowly moved forward and repeated the process again. Where I knelt down there was more droppings and they were still warm to touch, so I knew that the owner had to be nearby. As I crouched low and moved ever so slowly forward for the third time, movement forward on my left caught my eye. I could make out the shape of a deer's rump, but couldn't see the head or any antlers. Then movement to the right of the first deer caught my eye, and I could see a second animal and it had antlers. When I looked back to the deer on the right, I could see that it was walking out into the open and was also a stag. A quick assessment of his antlers indicated to me that he was missing a brow tine on his left-hand antler. He may never have grown one, or it may have been broken off with fighting. This stag seemed very interested in something that was taking place out in front of him. He remained motionless for ages, and I was beginning to wonder if there may have been another deer in front of him. He remained locked on point, staring in the same direction for just over 4 minutes. Each time I glanced towards the stag on the left, I could see that he also was staring in that direction. After seeing a kangaroo move in the wattles behind him, I thought it may have been just more of them, but he continued to focus on the area on his left out in front of him. He raised his tail to provide the silent signal to the other stag standing behind him. Sambar used this technique to warn others that there is a likely danger close by. The stag on my right, or righty as I shall call him, showed signs of relaxing, and his body language slowly started to change. He lowered his head and flicked his ears, but still kept his attention focused on whatever was out in front of him. I believe that the secret to success in sambar stalking is to see the deer before they see you. This provides the opportunity to plan and execute a stalk to get you up close and personal. As can be seen by this footage, I could have shot either of these two stags many times over. Spotting sambar deer from afar with binoculars or a spotting scope and then planning and executing a stalk is a great way to get close enough to take a shot or capture some great video footage moments. There is nothing more that I enjoy than testing my skills as a stalker to see how close I can get to a sambar deer before I spook it. At this stage I still wasn't sure what had been of concern to them both, so I just continued filming to see what they would do. Lefty had now relaxed and had decided to go back feeding on the abundant lush spring grasses. This was what they had obviously come to feed on before they were interrupted by whatever had attracted their attention. Righty was still concerned by whatever was out in front of him, but not to the point where he was ready to bolt and take off. He too shifted from where he had been standing for over 5 minutes, then turned and went back to feeding again. Lefty was now busy rubbing his antlers on a young gum tree, and Righty had his head down feeding away from me. It was at this point in time that I decided to follow up and film Lefty, as Righty had moved further away and I had a better approach angle with the breeze for Lefty. As I wasn't going to shoot either stag, I decided to ditch my rifle, backpack and binoculars and just take my video camera and still camera. Lefty was only about 40 metres away, so I lay down on my belly and crawled forward till I was about 30 metres apart from him. Each time he put his head down to feed, I gained a little more ground towards him. Noises to my right caught my attention, and I turned to find about 20 head of cattle almost on top of me. When they smelt me and all took off, I thought that the deer would do the same thing. To my surprise, they just continued on feeding and rubbing trees. These cattle were obviously what Righty had been focused on for such a long time. With his big table tennis bat size ears, he would have heard them coming from quite some distance off. Lefty was now content to just focus on feeding and checking out the scent on some of the many rubbed trees in the area. Righty had now fed out of my field of view, so I focused on getting in close and personal with Lefty. Each time he put his head down to feed or to smell something, I tried to make a bit more ground by crawling in closer. The steady breeze hitting me on my right cheek ensured that Lefty wasn't able to smell me, and also reduced the chance of any noises that I make being heard by him as well. As I crawled in closer, it became apparent that there was less ground cover available for me to hide in, so I decided to angle across towards a large burnt log laying on the ground to try and gain cover behind it. I had to wait till Lefty had his head down feeding or was facing away from me to ensure that he didn't detect any of my movements, as I was now completely out in the open, laying flat on the ground facing him. I started to become concerned that my cover would be blown as he started feeding directly towards me. I knew that if he continued on this pathway, he would spot me for sure. My only hope was to lay dead still and not move a muscle. Luckily for me, he deviated and continued feeding across to my right and was now only 10 metres away. He looked like he had picked up the scent of a deer, possibly where a hind or other stag had peed, as he continued sniffing a particular fern for quite some time. For Sambar, I believe their nose is their second opinion and is their go-to sense for communication and protection. They will tolerate us humans visually and or by hearing our noise, but they won't tolerate our scent, as we must smell like dog shit to them. At this point in time, the SD card light on my video camera started flashing, so I knew that I would have to change to my Canon SLR camera to continue videoing. I had crawled up beside a log, and this helped break up my outline and maybe confuse the stag. I found sambar deer very inquisitive, especially if you lower your profile. When you think about it, we're the only creature that gets around in the bush in the vertical form on two legs. By removing that configuration of humans by laying on the ground, they sometimes get confused. As I changed cameras, Lefty spotted some movement from behind the log. By now he was well and truly onto me, and he knew that something just wasn't right. He had probably walked past that particular log hundreds of times, and that odd shape behind it wasn't there before. So he then set about doing what sambar often do when they see something. They become very curious. He started raising and lowering his tail in what I call the silent signal, where the pale underside of their tail and the white area around their rump are signal to danger to other deer nearby. Foot stomping often follows this in an attempt to intimidate whatever it is into moving away or being scared off. At 8 metres he continued to advance, and the foot stomping and tail raising continued. I was hoping that he didn't decide to come over and stomp on me, or give me a flogging with those dagger-like antlers. I have watched hundreds of sambar deer do the foot stomping over the years, mostly as a form of intimidation. It also acts as a warning sign to other deer close by, especially from hinds with young. By far the most that I observed have been using one foot only, while some like this stag will change from side to side. I've only once seen a sambar hind that used her front left foot and then her rear foot on the opposite side at the back. As they say, there always has to be one that wants to be different. At this point in time, a slight shift in the breeze allowed the stag's nose to confirm the presence of danger, so he bolted out of there. I came across these two young velvet antler sambar stags out feeding. The closer of the two spotted my movement, so I dropped to the ground and tried to remain concealed in the waist-high ferns. The knobby stag at the back didn't know what was going on, but continued to look around for the danger that his mate had alerted him to. As is often the case with sambar deer, they will attempt to circle around to get your wind, so their nose gives them a second opinion and confirms the presence of danger. I have often wondered how many sambar deer I have walked past that have seen me and not spooked and just watched me walk by. It is for this reason that I now often stop and have a good look off to the side and behind me. It can be surprising how many more deer you see by doing this. By changing the angle and getting a different view into the surrounding vegetation, you are more likely to see a deer that was concealed whilst you were looking forward. This stag is a classic example of how inquisitive sambar deer can be. My mate Steve and I, along with both of our dogs, were walking into our intended hunting location where we intended to split up and hunt separately. We were caught out in the open, so hit the deck and sat down with both our dogs laying right in front of us on the ground. We had nothing to hide behind and were amazed to see this stag making his way towards us. I'm not sure what he thought this group of things sitting on the ground was, but he continued to look in our direction and walk towards us. This stag provided us with a good example of how inquisitive sambar deer can be. If they see something that they are not sure of and don't pick up your scent to confirm danger, they will sometimes come closer for a better look. Unfortunately, my camera battery warning light started flashing at this point, so I missed his response when he finally honked at us and took off.